The pain you avoid is the key to your freedom. But how's that? That pain you keep trying to ignore, it's the very thing holding you back from growing. In today's video, we'll explore how facing pain can be the biggest step of your life. Discover the transformative power of looking within, integrating the hidden parts of yourself, and finally, breaking free. The pain you avoid is, yes, the key to your freedom. Don't miss it. When we talk about self-knowledge, pain becomes inevitable. Jung knew that resisting it only made it stronger. Sometimes pain isn't just a physical sensation, but a repressed emotion, an unresolved trauma that insists on resurfacing. When we try to run away from our pain, it becomes the ghosts that haunt our lives, creating repeating patterns and situations. This is the nature of resistance. The more we try to ignore the pain, the more it chases us, until we finally decide to stop running. Pain, when closely examined, has a lot to teach us. It's not just an obstacle in the path, but a key that can unlock our understanding of ourselves. It might seem strange to think that by approaching pain, we can find ourselves, but that's exactly where the true journey of self-knowledge begins. Jung wasn't just talking about enduring pain, but about accepting it as a part of our experience. He invites us not to be afraid of looking into the darkest mirrors and seeing what's really there. Accepting pain might be the hardest step, but it's also the most liberating. Imagine you're facing an old fear, something you've always tried to avoid, and instead of running, you choose to face it head-on. You begin to realize that instead of being a burden, pain becomes a teacher. The moment you decide to no longer resist, self-knowledge becomes a deeper process, where pain stops being the enemy and becomes the ally. This brings us to the next step: what happens when we don't face pain? When Jung said, "What you resist persists," he was warning us about one of life's greatest paradoxes. The more we fight against something, the more it infiltrates our existence. By resisting, we give strength to what we fear the most. It's like trying to push a beach ball underwater. The ball might stay submerged for a while, but it will always pop up with even more force, always coming back to the surface. This is the game of resistance. The more we try to avoid, the more things end up coming back, and worse, often with an even greater intensity. Resisting is like carrying an unnecessary weight. You try to push away difficult emotions, painful memories, but they keep following you. No matter how much you try to ignore them, they're still there, showing up in unexpected ways. Maybe this translates into recurring problems in your relationships or patterns of behavior you just can't change. But the big question here, as Jung teaches us, is that resistance itself is what feeds this persistence. Instead of trying to ignore, we must learn to look at what resists inside of us with curiosity and courage. Imagine there's an area of your life that just doesn't work. You've tried everything, but nothing seems to work. Jung would suggest that perhaps it's time to stop fighting against that area and instead look at it more honestly. It might be that by facing what you've been trying to hide, the situation starts to transform. Resistance is the wall we build between ourselves and our true growth. When we stop resisting, when we accept the pain and difficulties, that's when we can really change our story. This leads us to understand that the only way to overcome resistance is by facing it head-on. And of course, how can we do that? Repressed pain never truly disappears. It stays hidden, waiting for the right moment to show itself, and it usually appears in unexpected forms. You might think you've gotten over a situation, but without realizing it, it starts to seep into your daily behaviors. Maybe you notice you're always sabotaging your choices, or that your relationships are filled with unresolved conflicts. These patterns emerge because the pain, though hidden, is still alive inside of you, influencing your decisions and actions, often without you even realizing it. This happens because the unconscious doesn't know the concept of forgetting. If you ignore the pain and try to bury it, it finds a way to express itself, whether through inexplicable anger or constant anxiety. For example, someone who suffered from betrayal in the past might start projecting distrust onto future relationships without even knowing why. Actions that seem to be reactions to current situations are often responses to old, unhealed wounds. And this cycle only perpetuates itself until you give yourself the chance to look at what's been repressed. Maybe you recognize yourself in some of these patterns and ask, how can I break this cycle? The first step is allowing yourself to feel. It's not about reliving the pain, but giving space for it to be acknowledged and eventually released. Sometimes this can happen through conversations with someone you trust or even writing about what you're feeling. The key is to understand that by allowing the pain to manifest consciously, you begin to heal the wounds that were hidden. And by doing this, a new path opens up, a path where pain no longer governs your choices. And that's just the beginning of something bigger, something deeper. So, how can you start doing that? Facing pain is one of the most important steps in the shadow integration process, according to Jung. The shadow is everything that we consciously reject or try to hide from ourselves. It could be anger, insecurity, or even sadness that we don't know how to deal with. But by resisting these parts of ourselves, we end up creating a distance from our wholeness. Jung believed that in order to achieve individuation, meaning becoming who we truly are, we need to integrate all aspects of ourselves, even the darkest ones. This, of course, includes the pain we try to avoid. When we allow ourselves to face the pain instead of running from it, we begin to reclaim the parts that were hidden. Individuation is a deep process of self-knowledge, where there is no room for masks or denial. This can be uncomfortable, no doubt. Looking at the more difficult aspects of our personality can scare us, but it's only by doing this that we can achieve true transformation. It's like, for example, facing a mistake we made in the past without criticizing ourselves, but rather learning from it so that it doesn't repeat itself in the future. This is part of the shadow integration process. Individuation is not about being perfect, but about being whole. This means accepting that flaws, fears, and even pains are part of who you are. When you face them, they cease to be obstacles and become tools for growth. However, for this to happen, you must be willing to look at those parts and give them the attention they deserve. And this opens the path to true freedom, where you are no longer a prisoner of what was repressed. So, how can you take that first step towards your wholeness? The shadow, according to Jung, is like a dark, locked chest within us, where we store everything we reject or can't deal with, our fears, insecurities, unfulfilled desires, and even our weaknesses. When we talk about repressed traumas, we're referring to experiences that we couldn't emotionally process and that we pushed into this secret place inside us. The thing is, when we ignore or try to push these aspects away, we're just pushing them deeper, creating a shadow that's even larger and heavier. But as Jung warns us, the only way to truly heal is to shed light on these aspects, allowing them to surface. Traumas and emotional wounds don't disappear over time, they just become harder to notice. They often disguise themselves in behavior patterns, disproportionate reactions to certain situations, or even blocks that prevent us from moving forward. Imagine you're afraid of failing, but you don't know where that fear comes from. When we investigate, we might realize that this fear has roots in a childhood experience where you were punished or ridiculed for trying something new. This trauma, although not consciously remembered, continues to influence your actions and decisions, creating limitations you didn't even realize were there. Understanding the shadow isn't about punishing ourselves for who we were or how we feel, but about embracing our wholeness. By facing these repressed traumas, we can begin to release the weight we carry, making space for healing. The shadow isn't something to be feared, but something to be understood and integrated. And by doing so, we discover that what was once a prison can now become a source of strength. So how can we begin to explore our shadow and look at it in a curious and non-judgmental way? Traumas and emotional wounds that aren't faced have a silent power over our lives, Often we don't even realize it, but they start to show up as psychological blocks that prevent us from growing. This happens because the human mind naturally tries to protect itself from intense pain and traumatic experiences. By not facing these situations, we create defenses that, instead of protecting us, end up limiting us. It's like walking around with an invisible weight on our shoulders without realizing how much it holds us back from moving freely. These blocks can show up in many ways: a constant sense of insecurity, fear of opening up, or even difficulties trusting people. Imagine that because of emotional abandonment in the past, you're afraid to fully commit to a genuine relationship and tend to distance yourself from others. This fear, which comes from unresolved trauma, can turn into a block that affects all aspects of your life. The result is that you start repeating the same patterns, often without realizing it, pulling away from what you truly want, because you're afraid of getting hurt again. Facing these traumas and emotional wounds isn't easy, but it's necessary to free yourself from the blocks that hold you back. One good way to do this is through self-reflection, therapy, or even techniques like meditation and therapeutic writing. The goal is to allow yourself to feel and, more importantly, understand that you're not your trauma. You're more than that. By looking at these wounds with courage, you begin to break down the barriers that limit your growth. And when that happens, a new possibility of living more authentically and freely opens up. So, how can you start taking small but consistent steps to confront these blocks? The unconscious has an incredible way of shaping our experiences and even the situations we attract into our lives. Often, without realizing it, we project our unhealed pains onto others and the world around us. This happens because the unconscious mind doesn't distinguish what's stored inside us from what happens in the outside world. The pain we avoid facing is reflected in how we react to life's situations, creating a cycle of projections and experiences that seem, at first, random. But in reality, they are a direct reflection of what we have yet to heal inside of us. Imagine that you had a traumatic experience in a past relationship where you felt abandonment or betrayal. What often happens is that this unconscious pain pattern gets projected onto your future relationships. Even though the people you relate to have no intention of hurting you, the unconscious can cause you to perceive or feel these situations in a distorted way. This projection process creates a cycle of suffering that repeats itself until the pain is recognized and integrated. What seemed like a simple friendship or romantic relationship turns unknowingly into a battleground of unresolved inner conflicts. The secret to breaking this cycle is understanding that the experiences we attract might be a reflection of what we need to heal within ourselves. By becoming aware of these projections, we can begin to see situations and people more clearly. Instead of blaming others or external circumstances, the key lies in looking within and seeing where the pain is still hiding, waiting to be addressed. In this way, we can change the way we react and thus transform our experiences. How can you start noticing and interrupting these projections so that your interactions become more authentic and healthy? Pain is often seen as something to be avoided or ignored. However, it can be one of our greatest teachers on the path to self-knowledge. When we feel pain, whether emotional or physical, it's like a light being turned on in an area of our life that needs attention. Pain doesn't arise without purpose. It points to where we need to evolve. It might be showing us that there's something unresolved within ourselves, something we need to look at more deeply. Instead of running from that pain, we can use it as a map that guides us toward healing and growth. For example, if someone feels a constant sense of inadequacy or insecurity, the pain accompanying those feelings might be a reflection of an unresolved trauma. Rather than distancing ourselves from that uncomfortable sensation, we can ask, what is it teaching me? Why am I feeling this? By investigating the roots of that pain, we can uncover thought patterns or past experiences that still affect us unconsciously. In this case, pain becomes a starting point for self-knowledge, revealing where we are ready to make deep changes and transformations. Understanding pain as a guide also means accepting it as part of the evolution process. Instead of viewing it as a burden, you can start seeing pain as an opportunity for growth. Every time we face emotional discomfort or difficulty, we're being invited to expand, to look inward, and to evolve. Pain then becomes a signal, an indication that there's something deeper that needs to be cared for and integrated. How can you start viewing your pain not as obstacles but as opportunities to discover more about yourself? Integrating the shadow, as Carl Jung teaches us, is one of the most powerful processes we can experience on our journey of self-knowledge. The shadow holds everything we reject, deny, or can't accept in ourselves. It might be the anger we try to hide, the fears we don't want to face, or even parts of our personality we find undesirable. When we refuse to look at these aspects, we end up repressing a huge amount of energy. This energy, instead of being used constructively, gets trapped, preventing us from living fully and authentically. When we decide to integrate this shadow, we give permission for these repressed parts of ourselves to express in a healthy way. It's like a liberation, as the energy that was once blocked can now be used creatively, positively, and aligned with our true desires and purposes. For example, if someone has a strong tendency to avoid confrontation and hides their anger, this repressed anger can manifest in less obvious ways, such as muscle tension, chronic fatigue, or even passive-aggressive behavior. By consciously integrating this anger, the person can start using it to defend their own boundaries and assert themselves authentically, without having to act destructively. The process of shadow integration is an invitation to become whole. The more we accept and make space for these hidden parts of ourselves, the freer we become. Instead of living in constant denial or running from who we are, we begin to embrace our entirety with all our aspects, both the bright and the dark. By freeing the repressed energy within us, we find a deep authenticity that allows us to live more aligned with our essence. Are you ready to start integrating your shadows and unleash your true energy? Carl Jung saw the unconscious as a powerful tool for healing and self-knowledge. For him, the unconscious wasn't just a repository of forgotten memories or repressed desires, but an essential guide for individuation. He believed that by paying attention to the unconscious, whether through dreams or introspection, we can access a deep source of wisdom. Dreams, for example, function as a direct communication between the conscious and unconscious mind, often containing answers or messages about emotional issues that have yet to be resolved. Listening to these messages is a crucial step in understanding what needs to be healed within us. Jung suggested that throughout life, many of the answers to our emotional, behavioral, and spiritual dilemmas were, in fact, hidden within us, waiting to be heard. The key lies in developing attentive listening. When someone starts paying attention to their own dreams, for example, they may begin to notice patterns, symbols, and images that make sense in relation to the moment they are living through. By understanding these symbols, the person begins to make peace with their unconscious, allowing it to guide them in healing and growth. Introspection is also a powerful tool for this process, as by looking inward and reflecting on our emotions, thoughts, and actions, we begin to see where there are blockages that need to be confronted. The unconscious, therefore, is not something to be feared or ignored, but an ally on the path to healing. When we start listening to it more attentively, it helps us understand the causes of our problems and guides us on how to move forward. For example, someone might be repeating destructive relationship patterns, and by analyzing their dreams and doing deep introspection, they realize that these patterns have roots in childhood wounds that have yet to be healed. This process of actively listening to the unconscious opens the door to deep, transformative healing. Are you ready to listen to your unconscious and allow it to to be your ally in the healing process. Dreams have a mysterious and profound power, and according to Jung, they are one of the most effective ways to connect the conscious with the unconscious. Often, dreams bring to the surface messages that we cannot access while awake, especially when it comes to emotions and pains that we avoid. These dreams are like a window into what is going on inside us, a way for the unconscious to communicate directly with us. For example, someone who is avoiding dealing with emotional pain, such as the loss of a loved one, may have recurring dreams about the deceased person, bringing unresolved grief to the forefront. These dreams don't happen by chance. They carry essential information for our healing process. Dreams often use symbols and metaphors, making interpretation an exercise in sensitivity and introspection. Instead of seeing a dream as just a random set of images, we can start asking, what is it trying to tell me about what I'm avoiding? If you dream of water, for example, it could relate to repressed emotions like sadness or anger. If you dream of a fierce animal, it might represent a fear you haven't faced yet. As we begin to notice these patterns, we can more clearly identify what inside us needs to be addressed. The key is to allow ourselves to explore the meaning of dreams without judging or denying them. Interpreting dreams is a practice that requires patience and attention, but it can be a transformative tool in the process of self-knowledge and healing. It's not just about trying to understand what the dream means, but also about accepting the message it carries, allowing ourselves to explore the emotions and traumas it might be revealing. By accepting these messages, we can start to consciously and healingly deal with the pain. And have you allowed yourself to listen to what your dreams have to say about the pain you still need to face? Facing pain is actually an invitation to become whole. The path to inner freedom involves looking within and confronting what we've been avoiding. The fear of feeling may try to block us, but the courage to look inside brings us a unique and true kind of liberation. As Jung said, those who look outside dream, those who look inside awaken. So, what are you waiting for to take the next step? Make peace with your pain and free yourself from the chains you've created for yourself. Now, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to keep going on this journey of self-awareness and transformation. And if you want to dive deeper, click on the card or in the description to watch our next video. We're in this process of growth together. Let's keep this conversation going.